I'm Loki and this is TRILLOQUY. Welcome back after another one of my hiatuses. I've officially moved on from the American Composers Orchestra to take on my new duties with the American Composers Forum. So I'll be getting back on track here now that I'm not working for two organizations beyond my TrillWorks media work. Looking forward to sharing several conversations with you that I've had backlogged for the last few weeks. And speaking of other TrillWorks media projects, just want to shout out WFMT in Chicago for getting Gateways Radio out the door. I know WDAV already has it rolling. WXXI has it scheduled. So ask your local classical music station about Gateways Radio. Let's get some Black classical music out into the national airwaves. Once again, I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to host and produce season 2 of that project. Now, getting back to this opus, I know that I'm supposed to respond to the post-DEI classical music article that folks are passing around. I think I promised to respond to that on social media. I think I'll get to that in another opus because I want to share some thoughts and feelings about my time at ACO in today's TRILLOQUY while the thoughts are fresh. But before I jump into any of that, it's my pleasure to share this opus's dialogue with you featuring Amanda DeBoer Bartlett. Amanda is a trained opera singer who just came out with her second full-length album of original songs that fall well outside of opera. For those of us who are classically trained, the professional track can seem pretty narrow at times, but Amanda is a great example of how we all can expand our possibilities as folks conditioned to see classical music as one thing. She sees her voice as being one that fits into a much broader scheme than just the opera stage. And she's really out here doing it with this latest album as proof of her work. So Amanda and I talk about her professional trajectory, what got her into writing music and performing non-Western classical in the first place, American classical music as I refer to it, and what inspired her latest album called Braided Together. So this is a really great chat that I'm excited to share with y'all. To get you into this dialogue with Amanda DeBoer Bartlett, here's a sample of the title track from the album Braided Together. More from me on the other side.
Mama had to be tough in this life. I had to be tough in this life. We're not so different. We're braided together.
What I think about is money when I hear genre. I think that genre is put in place by industry professionals to organize and market what we do. And I totally understand that. It makes sense. I think in the mid 20th century recording industry boom, genre started to crystallize in a way that I don't know if artists were thinking about it in that way before. So now it's something that we're brought up in, this concept of genre. And so that's how I think about it as a industry professional, is that this is a way that people are able to tell the story of what I'm doing to an audience. And in my training, I've had these different eras of my life where I grew up on country music, and then I studied classical music. So country music and folk music were the things that I found organically for fun. And then classical music was the thing that I studied, and it was the serious thing. And now I'm a lot of grown artists find a way to bridge that stuff. So that's where I'm at now. I'm making the bridge.
Is there a difference now in your view of genre, now that you have so much experience in the industry, as you were coming up and studying classical? Did you have that same perspective in those earlier days, genre as a sort of a marketing tool as opposed to something finite that defines music?
No, certainly not. I don't think I thought about genre until I went to college. And then it felt like, oh, I'm this, podunk girl from Omaha. I better not talk about Garth Brooks. And I went really hard into the classical music thing, and pretty early on, the composers found me, and I became friends with them. And so I started doing the experimental and contemporary thing, and that was great. I just sunk right into it. I loved it. And then eventually I came back around to folk music in a different lens. And that's when I started to really think about it and think about how we think about it and how people talk about it. And that's kind of how I spent my early 30s. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe there's something to this thing that I used to really love and pay attention to.
Hmm. And as I was listening to Braided Together, I couldn't help but to think about just one of the foundational aspects of this podcast is, decolonizing the way that we engage this phrase classical music. And what I tell everyone, my elevator pitch is that when you go to India and use the phrase classical music, there is a certain aesthetic that comes to mind for people that's so different than Bach and Rachmaninoff and all of those folks. And I think that can be true for many places around the world. And I've even experienced that firsthand, using the phrase classical music and the folk that I'm talking to thinking about something completely different. All of that to say, the aesthetic that you put forward and Braided Together, for me, I think is a great example of American classical. But of course, there's so much baggage that we attach to that phrase classical. I wonder how you react to that, yourself as a composer of American classical in a reimagined landscape where that phrase classical really is connected to lived experience and culture and not so much European history.
Loki, I love that. It was just like when you put that phrase out there, I said, yes, yes. I haven't had the term, and it was right in front of our faces, right? And you put it together. Yes. I think that for me, that lineage is a notated tradition in some sense. Of course, we have the Charles Ives and that whole thing.
Right.
But there's also the Woody Guthrie and the Elizabeth Cotten and the folks who weren't thinking about notation. They were exploring this landscape of sound and writing poetry, and it came from a different place, from the storytelling place, for a lot of them, and that's how I found my way to it, was through like the Woody Guthrie realm. In college, I found a CD of Woody Guthrie and Leadbelly, and it was just alternating their songs. And at the time, I needed it so much and I didn't realize it. And I didn't have this term, American classical music. And now I think, oh yeah, I was self-training through those recordings. And it took a long time for it to really marinate and germinate into something.
That's beautiful. Well, I'm glad to have been able to provide that for you.
Yes.
So I want to get into your background a little bit. So I'm going to shout out the co-founder of this podcast. His name is Scott Blankenship, and he is an Omaha native, lives in the Twin Cities in Minnesota now. But everything that I know about Omaha, I've learned through him and his musical practice, which I would describe as roots music. Like this bluesy sort of music. If I had to guess the sort of sound of Omaha, that's what I would guess. I wonder if that is the case for you. Like when you were a little girl, what's some of the music that was surrounding you, generally speaking, in Omaha?
I grew up on radio pop country, and then eventually found my way to musical theater. And those were and then I grew up in the Catholic Church. So a lot of that post-Vatican II glory and praise Catholic Church music, which some folks might, which might spark happy or unhappy memories for folks. So that's a lot of the stuff that was just in my daily life. And I'd say like the artists that I was listening to the most in high school that stuck with me would be like the Chicks, which formerly known as the Dixie Chicks,
Right.
Alison Krauss, and those sort of country bluegrass sort of folks at the time. I guess they were calling them newgrass, and Nickel Creek,
Oh, sure.
and things, the Chris Thile stuff. And so that's the stuff that really hit me from the pop folk world, the American classical world. Yay.
Mm-hmm.
And and then I really latched on to Purcell and Fauré and Mozart in my voice lessons. So thinking about song early on from Purcell, I think Purcell has had a huge impact on how I think about harmony,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like modally mixing and things like that. So those are the things that I was kind of in my musical side. And then in my piano lessons, I was always trying to play Scott Joplin, and my teacher was always trying to get me to play Bach, and I get it now. But it's like,
Right.
just give me a beat. Come on. you know? So that's what I was studying.
For people who aren't familiar with Purcell, I just need to name that this is old, old music that we're talking about. Did you feel like you were living a sort of double life, listening to the Chicks and Chris Thile and studying Purcell? Was there a bridge there, or in those earlier days were they just completely separate existences?
I was just so hungry for music. Just anything that anyone put in front of me, I devoured. And I was obsessed. And I remember my teacher would give me a little Italian song from the 26 Italian Songbook, which every
Mm-hmm.
singer that's starting in college
The
does.
Yellow Book, yep.
The Yellow Book, and they're all from like 1720. And she would give me a song and I'd come back with it memorized. I wanted anything that anyone would put in front of me. I was obsessed with it, and musicals and show choir and all of it. So to me, I was just so desperate to try things and explore and perform that I wasn't thinking very in a nuanced way about what anything was and what I was exploring.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was in college that, I started to feel like, oh, there's good music and bad music. And maybe the music that is fun music is also bad music. And I started to have this morality attached to things and attached to vocal technique. We attach all this morality to vocal technique, which is kind of a weird thing that we may or may not get into.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because even I've learned now that we may say that a note is in tune or out of tune, but in the European tradition, in the way that it translates into English and many of those languages, it's false tuning. That's the language they use anyway. So when you talk about this morality connected to the voice, I mean, the whole Fach system, and
you're basically saying if
lot.
Someone's flat, they're like a dirty liar. It's like, no, maybe there's some emotion attached to me being out of tune or microtonal or whatever it is.
How'd you learn to break from those so-called moral structures of music?
Improvisation.
Nice. Say more about that, because so many classical or classically trained musicians find improvisation foreign, maybe scary. I mean, is this the product of the multiple quote unquote genres that you were engaging as you were growing up?
I started improvising in my 20s, and I mean, I realize now that kids are always improvising, and
Right.
high schoolers are out of control and we don't even know what we're doing all the time. So there is a form of improvisation to just being a teenager and having hormones like that. But in college, I was doing the sort of straight ahead European old music thing with Mozart and all of that. And it was wonderful. And I loved it. And then I started doing the contemporary classical music thing, which is a version of that, but by people who are alive.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it felt really rebellious. And then eventually that became its own structure around me. And I started working with this guitarist named Jesse Langen. And we were going to do a show together, and we didn't have any repertoire that we were working on. He said, well, why don't we just make something up? I was like, what are you talking about? What are you on? And he said, let's just make something up. Let's just try it. And so we started improvising, and it felt so natural to me as an actor. And I think there's a difference between wanting external stimulation and wanting to rely on your internal locus of self-control as a musician, what's going to emerge from within me. As musicians who've been practicing for any amount of time, I think we know a lot more than we give ourselves credit for. But we're so used to requiring instruction and direction. We want a guaranteed result. We want control. We want predictability. This is how all artists and arts institutions in the large structure of the industry have been able to create and build these big things. but it's not always very fun.
Right.
And so that being able to do that and realize I know a lot of things, music can be pleasurable, and taking a risk will help me discover something I didn't know before. Those realizations in my 20s helped me become a writer and explore that aspect of myself, the subconscious aspect of my artistry.
So when you talk about the sort of guaranteed outcomes or the predictability that classically trained musicians try to shoot for, I wonder what you were predicting for yourself at that stage in your career. Did you have plans to be a professional improviser, or what were you looking to do at least at that stage?
I think I'm always trying to balance what I call self-focused indulgences, or whatever we want to call them, the selfish things of an artist, where I'm creating something just for me, and the things I'm doing for other people. And that balance goes back and forth when I'm doing more for myself or more for others. And I think the improvisation thing felt like a very personal, selfish thing.
Mm,
I didn't care if anyone listened. I didn't care if anyone liked it. It was just me having fun with my friend. And I would often use like vintage children's books for the text,
hmm.
public domain and super weird. So really rife for creating things. And that's how I thought about improvisation. I didn't take it seriously. And I think that that's why it led somewhere, because I wasn't trying to control the outcome.
That's interesting. How necessary, or I wonder what some of the tools from your education beyond DePaul in Chicago played a role into the artist you are now. I mean, there are many people who will listen to your music and not necessarily hear "quote unquote" classical technique or classical aspects. Well, I wonder what the overlap is that folks may miss.
I My post undergraduate training was really useful, and not in the way that I thought it was going to be useful. Surprise, surprise. I really just thought I was going to be a college teacher and sink into some department somewhere and have a voice studio. And I also wanted to perform. I basically wanted to be Tony Arnold, who is a contemporary classical music soprano. And I went to study with her at Buffalo in the hopes of just having her turn me into another her. And it didn't work out that way because I'm not her. On one of my recitals there, I'd become obsessed with Woody Guthrie and his poetry and his
Hmm.
politics, of his sort of leftist politics. And she said, well, maybe you could put some of that on your recital. So then I'm doing this recital with Pastures of Plenty on it. And that to me was a watershed moment. This belongs alongside all of these other things. Again, didn't have your amazing term, American classical music, but that's what she was helping me find. And my lessons with her were wild. Like, I'd go in with some Schubert song or something, and we'd spend an hour on one measure of music. Like, but really, what about this harmony? Just
Right.
going into the depths of it. So that was just such an education. And then I went to Bowling Green, Ohio, where they have a contemporary music doctorate.
Oh, wow.
And my teacher there is the most amazing voice mechanic I've ever encountered. She just got me completely lined up, like things that, you know, tiny, tiny little muscles that you wouldn't imagine are getting in the way of your freedom of expression. She would just hone right in on it. It was incredible. And I met the colleagues I'm still working with. I met my sisters in quiz ensemble, who are my chosen family now, and we're still together touring to this day. And so it put me in the path of those folks, and yeah, it's really just about the people and how they open me up to new things.
Mm. I definitely want to get into the album Braided Together, but you mentioned the leftist politics of Woody Guthrie. That also brings to mind, for me, people like Pete Seeger, just, this rich tradition that we have of that intersection of the political and the musical. This is something that, I've always fought to bring forward on the so-called classical side. We have the history of Shostakovich. We can go all the way back to Beethoven and politics, but it seems like something that the classical industry these days tries to sort of steer away from. Just for the sake of people who may not be familiar with those folk music traditions that intersect the political, was this something that you immediately saw in these musical practices and these histories, something that you had to dig for and happen to find? I wonder how that aspect of the music came to you.
I think as I became more politically aware, I
Mm,
became more aware of the subtlety in their lyrics, or the not the less subtle thing. I mean, the
right.
protest songs too, right? But I became more tuned into it when Woody Guthrie is singing in Pastures of Plenty, and he's talking basically about migrant workers
Hmm.
and going from farm to farm and harvesting our crops, and you'll never see us, but we're the ones making this all happen. That didn't become clear to me until I became aware of labor struggles, and um, and that I'm still learning more about it. Quince, my vocal ensemble, is putting out an album called Dust Bowl, which is largely about Woody Guthrie and the Great Depression of the 30s and the Dust Bowl disasters of those times. And that's my that was kind of my first exploration in a deep way into those politics. And then, yeah, getting into, John Baez and all of
Right.
those radicals, who are still very radical. And so it's a gift that keeps on giving. I loved the music originally because I love a good story. I come from a lineage of storytellers in my family, and that's how we hung out, just telling stories. And so for me, songwriting and folk music, the original attraction was, how do I tell a good story? And it turns out that, as you said, no music is apolitical. All these stories contain their own political center. And that's just opening up some new richness for me in the process.
You're giving me my playlist for today. I mean, Joan Baez. I haven't thought about her music in a while, so I need to circle back.
Yes.
Do you ever see and not to stick on this for too long, but I just find it really interesting. Do you see an engagement of the political as something that brings audiences in, that may push certain audiences away who are interested in certain sort of genres? How do you engage the musical political next to the career things, just the nuts and bolts of getting the
Mm.
album sales, getting the audiences that you need to survive as an artist?
That to me is where the storytelling comes in.
Mm,
Not as a manipulation tactic, but as a way of packaging the message of our humanity in a way that our brain works. Our brain wants there to be a beginning and a middle and an end. It wants there to be a context. So being able to create a context, we can't avoid the political as much as some may try. It's just
mhm.
there within us. We're steeped in it. We're messaging that all the time unintentionally. Being able to tell a story is a way of bringing people in, and making, I guess you would, what some might call the absolute music or instrumental music
Mhm.
that's political. I think that's a lot. It's a lot harder to do, and I haven't tried to do it. Um, I, that to me, being the Shostakovich, being the instrumental composer who can create a political message, is such a inspiring thing for me, and it's not the way my brain works as a creator. So it's just, my stuff just comes out as stories
That's
naturally,
beautiful.
and then the politics are in there.
Well, let's talk about the story of Braided Together. First of all, what is the title supposed to do for us? There are ideas that come to mind for me, but I wonder if you could share.
The title is one of the tracks, and a title of one of the tracks, and uh, that song, in a way, is the most political, although it comes out as emotional. My mom would braid my hair all the time as a kid, and she did the tightest braids. Like, it would just pull my skin back like a facelift. They were beautiful braids, and we would fight. And that's the sort of um, physical center of the piece. And then, sorry,
Oh, no worries.
Daughter's coming through. We're good. Okay. The political aspect of it, I guess, is that I am very different from my family in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
Politically, religiously. I live in Chicago, they live in Omaha. There's just so many ways in which we don't align in our politics and our life. But they are my family. And we are braided together in that way. And the things that they did give me, my sense of integrity, my ability to push through difficult things, all of that comes from my family. I got all of these wonderful things from them, and yet we're so different strands of hair. So
Hmm.
that's what it is for me. One of the lines is I like poetry and mama likes numbers. My mom was in the banking industry and ran a credit union. And so we're so different, and yet we're of the same stuff.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. Were the other tracks on the album conceived around the same time? Were these songs written over a long period of time? How did the body of work that is braided together come to the world?
I am pure chaos, water sign, everything just flows out how it's gonna. This is poetry collected over 20 years
Oh,
of
wow.
just snippets and scraps and things that eventually came together. Several breakups in there from a past life. It's just all from all over my life. And I wrote my first album of original songs during COVID, and then I think that album is much more experimental than this. And this, I moved to Chicago. One of my neighbors is a fellow musician and composer, Dave Remnick, and him and I started meeting up. And I said, hey, can you give me some songwriting lessons? And then I started getting into the song craft, which I'd never paid attention to before. I just thought songs were supposed to emerge from you naturally, and then you leave them alone.
Hmm.
And so then I started getting into the real nuts and bolts of it. And that's when I started compiling all of these things around themes of family, motherhood, and travel.
I wonder if you could talk about the collaborators on this album, considering the personal nature of these songs. It seems like a relationship has to be built before you start, bearing it all with fellow musicians.
There were a couple stranger danger people on the album who turned out to be so fabulous
Oh,
that
good.
now I want to work with them forever. Yeah, so my closest collaborator in the songwriting world is Jesse Langen, who's this guitarist who also plays with me in Ensemble Dal Niente, which is a classical chamber orchestra. And him and I have been working on these songs for a long time. And he plays all of the acoustic guitar on the album. He works with a fiddle player because most of his performance life outside of classical is Irish traditional music.
Hmm.
So she's an Irish fiddle player and she is a rock star. And so he introduced us. Her name is Evelyn Tom. And so she came in on a couple songs. My friend Luke Polipnik, who I met from Omaha days, is now in Chicago, and he's a heavy jazz player and does all the electric guitar on the tracks. And he introduced me to the bass player and drummer, Matt Eulery and Jeremy Cunningham, and they're heavy jazz guys. And so they brought something that I don't have any experience in. They brought that sort of session feel, the jazz feel, and that aspect to the songs, which is super cool. There's a pianist I worked with, Paul Hamilton, and he's so sensitive and intuitive. And when he plays, I just sort of instantly start crying. It's just such sweet, tender piano playing. And yeah, a couple singers, Caitlin Foley and Catherine Lashy, just like phenomenal. If I could do a Linda Ronstadt, Emmylou Harris, Dolly Parton trio album like they did, those would be the two chicks
Nice.
I'd bring on. And then this fabulous Bowron player from the Irish scene, Steve Morrow. And it's a percussion player from Dal Niente, Kyle Flens. So it's kind of from the classical music, the Irish traditional music, and the jazz world. Those things came together and the soup of it is this album. And oh my gosh, Emma Hospelhorn, the flutist on the album, um, she's maybe the best improviser I know in any style. And there was the Lincoln Highway. That track was basically, we played it for her and she was testing levels, and that's her testing levels. It's like, well,
Wow.
we got it.
And that
like,
saves money for studio time.
it stays, and she's sort of like, we tried a couple other things, and it's just like, nah, you had it on the first take. It's just right there. So that's how it came together.
There's one state of mind that I will put myself in if I'm preparing to be a part of an orchestra that's recording, or if there's some chamber music piece that I need to record. I need to make sure that I'm coming in perfect. Everything is right in the middle of the box. You know, that sort of preparation that's very classical. I wonder how similar or maybe how different your preparation was for these recording sessions. I mean, you've mentioned your experience in improvisation, how things just sort of flow out. My sense is that this is a little different than coming prepared to sing your songs perfectly and leaving the booth.
It's very different. It's I don't know, it's much closer to witchcraft, I'd say. And from the vocal standpoint, it's so letting yourself be imperfect but expressive is the thing that I'm discovering with recording original songs.
Hmm.
It's the close mic thing. You know, I was trained to sing in an acoustic space with no amplification, so I can sing really loudly. What I learned working with my producer on my first album is like, you're working too hard. You're trying way too hard, and it sounds like it. Like, you have to strip it down, make it much more intimate in the studio as a singer. And so I'm trying to get into a headspace. Like, all of my songs, they're full of metaphor and yada yada, but they're coming from a real place in my life. So I'm trying to transport back in time to that place and sing and embody the person that was experiencing that. And so that's the way I'm approaching it. And I'm trying to bring that more into my classical music life as well, because anytime you can be more fully present as a human, that's your audience building right there, right? Giving people a real authentic experience. So that's what I'm trying to do as a performer. And then I'm also putting on my producer hat, saying, well, maybe we should bring the drums in here. And that's the arranging thing, is a whole new art form for me that I'm, just discovering now.
When you talk about a whole new art form, I'm thinking about some of the artists that you brought up previously. So folks like Chris Thiele. I hadn't heard of Chris Thiele until I got into public radio. And then, of course, you know, he's the king of that, or once was. So I couldn't miss him there. You brought up the Chicks. I hadn't heard of the Chicks until they performed with Beyonce at one of the country music awards and all the hoopla that surrounded that. You know, I bring those things up to say that for many people, the general aesthetic of Braided Together is very different, very foreign, maybe even a style that folks have different sorts of baggage connected to, you know, not having, you know, the experience with it that you have. I wonder how you think about this along the lines of trying to expose more people to Western classical, you know, as we try to say to people, oh, give this a try. Oh, let's do the kids' concerts. I wonder if there's similar thinking for you when it comes to the aesthetic, again, on this album, which is just as foreign to many people.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize that people didn't listen to country music when I was growing up and moved to Chicago. Like, wait, you don't. And then knowing that people who like folk music don't always listen to classical music, there are all of these bridges that can be built still. And I understand why people have this baggage with classical music and with country music. The politics can be atrocious.
Mm-hmm.
Even when the music is beautiful, it's like, I don't want to know. Oh no. And there is a lot of, obviously, political diversity within these genres as well that don't always make it to the big institutions and the radio that we don't hear. And my ultimate dream as a performer is to build enough trust with my audience that I could bring out a contemporary classical piece on a show with my original music, and that it just feels like a seamless thing. That the song masters that I love, Judy Collins and folks like that, Rhiannon Giddens, they are bringing those things together. I mean, Rhiannon will bring out an aria in the middle of a banjo concert, and nobody questions it because she is the queen of all of it right now. So that's where I want to get with my audience, is that I could say, okay, and now here's a Clara Schumann piece that you might not know, and now I'm going to sing a song about my grandma, and that it all kind of goes together.
So it sounds like you're still practicing the Western classical, the European classical to a degree. Are there specific techniques that you have to engage to protect the country side of your voice from the classical side of your voice, or how does that work?
I wish I sounded like a country singer. I just got this, like, people, so many times in my life, people have said, your voice is just so sweet. I really want to sound like Emmylou Harris and have that grit. It's not who I am. Maybe if I start smoking now, I can get there. but I think I just have that sweetness to my voice. One of the things I didn't like about opera is that I was always getting cast as like a small child or a cheeky maid, because I just got that cute voice. So that's all to say that, like, I try to sound grittier in my country stuff, but it kind of always comes out that way. And the classical thing is just very natural for me at this point. So I'm trying to just find in each song what makes sense for that song, and trust in that feeling, and not worry too much about whether the technique is translating properly. That's how I feel about it, I guess.
Because it's not like, I mean, maybe one of your voice teachers could be in the audience, but for most people, they're just looking for something beautiful.
They just want a good story. They want to have a nice time, they're getting out of the house. They got a babysitter, and they put in all this effort to come see you. And so, I'm just trying to do my best with that. And the thing that I'm finding, and I don't know if you find this with bassoon, is that once you know the piece, for me, if I can just forget about the technique a little bit, it's going to flow a lot more instead of being really overwrought and stiff. So in my stage performance, like now that I'm performing in like bars, it's a very different expectation of what technique is. The technique is, can you get people to pay attention to you? That's the technique.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to ask that. When you're standing on stage in an opera house, it sort of comes with the space that everyone is going to sit down. They're going to be quiet. They're going to clap when they're allowed to clap. Quote unquote. I'm all about clapping when you want to clap. That's
Yes,
another conversation. Yes. But I wonder if you can speak to that difference that a different aesthetic, a different so-called genre brings forward. What sort of practice or experiences can you share when it comes to engaging an audience that's got a beer in his hand, or maybe there's a couple arguing over here? Yes. How do you really make that connection in that sort of space?
I have never been a big stage fright person, but stage banter, having to do stage banter, it makes me want to change my name and move to a new country. It is horrible. You're basically trying to be a stand-up comedian, and that is the most difficult art form, I argue.
Sure.
And so that is tough. But I had this experience recently because Jesse wrote me into doing some Irish music gigs, and that is a crowd, man. So I show up at an Irish session at an Irish bar in Chicago. These are institutions, right? And he says, well, why don't you do Fields of Athenry? Anyone who knows Irish music will know that tune. I said, okay. So I start singing this song, and the whole bar is singing with me. And they're hooting and hollering and cheering. And I get to the high note and they're clapping. And I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. These are just people having fun. And was it like the artistic pinnacle of my life? No. But that was an important experience for me because it's just so different from what I'm used to in the classical world. And that's something that I just like, how can we bring all of this together? How can we get that energy and that collective spirit in other spaces that are just physically designed from an architectural standpoint to not be that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tough.
And even on the orchestral, on the classical side, we do really wish for those moments, but there's just something that's holding us back. My idea is that all of us who want to change what those spaces feel like, we have to be the ones to have the courage to just stand up and hoot and holler in the middle of the
Yes.
aria, but I guess time will tell.
Yes, I mean, we'll be that person. I mean, you guys are such a high profile now that it'd be like, what's going on? But yeah, I do agree, and I think that the organizers at these institutions do secretly want that too, but they don't know how to get there. It takes us sort of outside agitators, so to speak, to start, making it a little messier. They need that. They want that. They don't know how to get there.
So for the musicians, the singers who are in conservatory now, that may want to branch out, they don't see that the opera world being what they want to dedicate their lives to. I wonder what sort of advice or guidance you would offer as far as branching out. It can be a really scary thing for classical musicians to do something different. I wonder if there's anything that you can share to those folks who are thinking about that.
For me, it was a lot of sort of dreaming and journaling and paying attention to that. I like to do a lot of sort of new agey stuff, collages from magazines, cutting out pictures and words and just making little collages about what I'm feeling, and just really paying attention to yourself and your emotional landscape. I think that that's something that all humans could stand to do. Finding whatever meditation or prayer practice lines you up and gets you centered. And it might surprise you what that is. Like, look far and wide. Try everything. You might be surprised at what works for you to just get into an introspective space. Pay attention to what you're doing for fun when no one's paying you or telling you what to do. That's all clues to where you are. And then I think something that I've realized is that there's not a point when someone comes out of the woodwork and says, okay, you're an artist now. You get to make choices.
Yep.
It could start small, where you decide that you're singing some really sort of bread and butter piece that's been recorded 50 times by all the most famous artists. And you decide to make a choice that's different than any of them have made. It could start within the framework of what you're already doing. You say, I'm going to hold that a little longer. I'm not going to crescendo there. I'm going to take it way faster or way slower and just try it. And then realize that nothing breaks when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the world doesn't end. And that your choices are valid. I think that's kind of the first step on the path, is learning yourself. And then taking all the little side paths and taking them seriously. When you have no time to do that because you're a student or you're working full time and trying to also be an artist. It's like, there's never a good time to do that. I'm trying to learn guitar right now. I sound terrible. There's never a good time to do these things. But if you can start when you're a student, it's easier down the road the earlier you start.
I feel like, the big through line of our conversation has been breaking out of these self-imposed parameters. My relationship with classical music is what it is. It's always evolving, but it just feels like one of the big things is breaking out of this conditioning of something outside of us being the correct thing. As you mentioned, the crescendo is right there in bar 17. That means I have to do that, but it doesn't mean that we have to do that. It's just breaking out. I feel like is that thing that so many of us classically trained musicians need to have the courage to do, just to take that step forward and then take the next one until, the arias are far behind you, as it seems like you've done with your career.
And then you can take that that look on it in a different perspective and respect all the craft you have,
Hmm.
respect the craft of these composers from a different perspective and respect it, and also recognize that there's more, so much more.
Indeed, indeed. Well, how can folks learn more about this upcoming album, Braided Together, maybe some of your upcoming performances, or just about you generally?
So my website is amandadeboer.com. And I have a Bandcamp page, a Spotify page. So other music is up there as well. This album comes out on June 6th. I'm doing a little album tour. Those dates are going to hit my website soon. We're going to hit Milwaukee, a few places in Iowa, a little Midwest tour, so emo. And then, yeah, I perform around Chicago all the time. I perform with Quince and Down the Ente.
Nice. Well, my final question for you is sort of loops back to what we were just talking about, this idea of not only individual musicians and students taking that step forward, but institutions taking that step forward, all the way toward the industry taking that step forward to create the ecosystem where musicians can really explore and find their path earlier on in their academic journey. From your perspective, is this something that is done by changing Juilliard and Curtis and these institutions? Do we need to build new ones? Do we need to shine a light on maybe some of the institutions that don't always get the light? I wonder what your vision is for a pathway toward just a broader ecosystem for students so that they can really realize their own artistry at an earlier stage in their careers.
I love this question. And yeah, just like any political activism, it starts right where you are in your community. Having lived in a few different cities, to me, it's a lot easier in a smaller community. Omaha was perfect for this. The institutions want this in a place like Omaha. I don't know if Juilliard wants it, but Opera Omaha, the Omaha Symphony, and the art institutions there wanted it, but they weren't on the ground with us artists. They didn't know always what was happening in the small micro communities and the trends. They don't always have the administrative bandwidth, the funding. So when I came in and I said, let me help you do this, let's set up some side concerts, they were so all about it. So in the smaller communities, this does and really can happen. It can happen at your university. Start a club, start an organization and just start doing your thing and don't ask for permission. I mean, you got to get approval for some stuff. You got to find the grant money, but just start making those small moves wherever you are. And the big institutions want to be cool. They want to be relevant. And they'll start to catch up when they see that the small organizations are doing cooler stuff than them and getting the audience.
I hold it still, so close to me. The loving memory of the cherry blossom tree.
That tune's called Cherry Blossoms, another really phenomenal track from Amanda's recently released album, Braided Together. I have links in the description of this opus if you'd like to revisit what you heard in our dialogue or earlier in this opus, as well as a link to Amanda's website for you to purchase Braided Together. It's a really phenomenal collection of works, and I hope that you'll dive into it and check it out. Again, I think it's so important to highlight people from the so-called classical world who have been able to reach beyond. I also appreciated the Omaha connection she highlighted. Shout out to Scott Blankenship, who I know is listening. Just a really all-around great opportunity for me to connect with Amanda. So thanks so much to Amanda and her entire team for helping me make this one possible. Okay, so it's the Monday after my final day at the American Composers Orchestra, and I wanted to share my reflections here in the Trilloquy while they're fresh in my mind. So I met the CEO of ACO on a virtual panel at some point, I think in 2021, and I'm not sure what it was about, probably one of those post-George Floyd or pandemic things, but I gave my usual spiel about American classical music and what we all need to do to reframe people's thinking around that phrase, the white supremacy tendencies of all of this programming and how we need to connect those that status quo to the broader conversation. Just my usual stuff. Anyway, the CEO found my politic attractive, at least in the moment, and invited me to apply for an open role that she had coming down the line. And long story short, a few months later, I was on staff. So going into ACO, my goal was really to shake things up. My goal was to help orchestras across the country understand that they're doing it wrong by centering dead European composers in American orchestral programming. I think I was able to do a little of that within my responsibilities in the role, and will continue to as I move forward, of course. But what I didn't expect was to be able to engage a thriving community of early career composers. I mean, just to really make so many friends, much less, engage so many folks who are now professional colleagues. It's really one of the crown jewels of my career so far. And I don't want to start naming people because I'll forget someone for sure. But I'm very proud to have a direct impact on the career trajectories of 88 human beings in my role. I counted through all of the programs, and that's the number: 88 composers who I was able to support in my work. Now, think about your local orchestra for a second. Would you be confident in saying that they've put on 88 living composers in the past 3 years? I can't think of any institutions that can make that claim, to be frank. And it's not me trying to sit on a high horse as much as it's me just expressing the gratitude that I have for what I experienced at ACO in this regard. It's really something that I don't think I would have been able to do with any other institution within the arts. I brought our programs to the conservatory level for the first time in the organization's history. I brought the programs to Canada for the very first time. And there's even a partnership with an orchestra in Korea happening later this year that I facilitated. So I'm leaving the role very proud and very grateful. And special shout out to Larab K. Raphael, who's taken my place there. I know that he's going to do some really, really great work. So where I will be a little trill today is with what really went into my decision to transition out of the organization and some of the realizations that I'm already coming to. Now more than ever, I understand the importance of having resources. I've long argued against capitalism and continue to argue against it. But I think this critique has to live alongside a desire to do two things. Number one, accumulate resources on an individual level. And number two, maintain a dedication to community in utilizing said resources. So I moved on to ACF, quite frankly, because I was made a financial offer that would expand my financial capacity. Now, don't get me wrong. I still have six-figure student loan debt that's on my back, so I'm by no means in the clear, even beyond a working class existence. The Chinese restaurant, the Mexican deli, and the bodega here in my neighborhood know me very well because they have food that I can afford to buy every day. Not to mention the rent in New York is high and getting higher, and I'm always pinching pennies at the end of the month. But, in my new role, I do have more money to contribute to the nonprofits that I believe in, more access to infrastructure that can get more artists paid, and, even another level of stability that allows me to house people when they need a night or two in the city, to go to people's concerts without bugging them for comp tickets, et cetera, et cetera. For all of this, I'm grateful, and I think it's very important for those of us who can to support the arts and the people within the arts, and more specifically, the marginalized people within the arts in whatever way we can and to the greatest degree that we can. As far as realizations in this new executive director role, I'm even closer to the people whose money and connections make these jobs possible. If I believe in funding artists of color, for example, I have to believe in the folks with deep pockets who want to give some of their money away. And I have to make sure that I'm not marginalizing them in the way that I continue my mission of decolonizing classical music. This is very difficult work because what if I'm in front of an investment banker whose millions are built on the backs of underpaid workers? Does the marginalized artist want me to forego an opportunity for them as some sort of virtue signal? What if I'm in front of let's say, a war sympathizer or the real estate developer that's gentrifying cities across the nation? Is it my responsibility to keep an artist broke so that that millionaire knows how I feel about him? Or do I need to move forward in whatever way that I can? And I know that people have different opinions about that. I'm just speaking to the situation that I feel like I'm in and the realizations that I'm coming to. It'd be one thing if all the money was going in my pocket, if I was just some someone personally invested in growing my business so that I could have a mansion somewhere. But that's not the case. All of this funding, all of this grants, all of this work is for artists and for art and its ability to really transform our society. I was told last week, that one of the artists that I put on through my work with ACO has guaranteed secured income for the next few years while I'm trying to make sure that I make it to the end of the month. And again, that's not a complaint or a dig. It's, gratitude. I'm saying that with a smile on my face. Anyway, all of this to say that I'm finding myself having to take a step back from the way I typically engage a certain class of Americans and think about a bigger picture that includes those who don't have the opportunity to face people with dollars to give away in the way that I have access to those people. It's an artist's job to make art, and it's my job to secure the money and opportunities for that art to live. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here as far as what this will look like in my new role. But what I will say is that art for art's sake is not a thing. So art has to speak to something for it to get my attention. It has to be pushing society in a positive direction, because this notion for art's sake is a European conditioning that has colonized the minds of people in classical music and created this status quo of people who, treat this music as an escape, when this art really needs to be used as a tool. Now, looking ahead into the future, I want to make sure that the freedom that I hope to build for myself and Dell is built on a career that decentered my bank account. I look forward to looking back as I'm chilling somewhere here in New York, or probably even away from the United States, working on my own art, hopefully, knowing that what I've been able to secure for myself was the result of helping others realize their dreams. A sort of, musical bodhisattva path is what I see myself on. And it does have an ending, for sure. I don't have professional aspirations beyond freedom. That's what I'm working on. Think back to Kizzy from the show Roots, if you're familiar. Kizzy didn't want the head Negro in charge on the plantation. She wanted a man whose aspirations extended beyond the plantation. And where I am at this point in my life, I'm feeling the exact same way. My eyes are not on the president of this or the CEO of that. My eyes are on freedom. Now, I'm thrilled to work on snatching that freedom for myself by utilizing my new position with the American Composers Forum to get me a step closer to it. I'm filled with hope and gratitude for what I'll be able to do as the executive director of ACF, but I want to make it clear that this position is a means, not an end. And I hope that you'll consider your life and your work in the arts in the same way. Freedom is really what we're all working on. Art is a means to that freedom. Thanks as always for your continued support of this show. I look forward to getting to work with even more of you as I continue to embed myself even deeper into the New York music scene here. I'm not moving anywhere. I know people have been asking, and I hope you'll think about, again, what your work means for your freedom. I want us all to experience it and to thrive within it. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, to freedom. Talk to y'all again soon. Peace.